You may notice that we are surrounded here by our lovely hand sanitizing stations that have been all alohaed up. And just if you show up tomorrow, just know that there are multiple ways that you could stay safe. There are masks that you could pick up here at the church if you would like to have one during service and you don't have one of your own. There's going to be these fancy hand sanitizer stations all over the place, so you can use that if you like. We would ask that you would please refrain from touching each other. Social distancing is still the best that we can do. So please, if you come tomorrow, just note those things will all be available. We are in John chapter 7. Finally! Yay! We spend a bunch of time in John chapter 6, but John chapter 7 here, we're transitioning into what is John chapter 7 through the end of the gospel is actually the last 6 months of Jesus' life and ministry. So we're transitioning from kind of the beginning of his ministry or the calling of his disciples and some initial signs and Acts teachings that Jesus gave into the final 6 months of his life. And we know that because John chapter 7 starts off with the Jewish Feast of Booths, which we're going to get to here. And we know that happens sometime in September, October, probably the year before or the year of his crucifixion. So we are now getting into hostile territory. We were at somewhat hostile territory earlier on when we started chapter 3. People are still trying to figure out Jesus, but some people are not liking what he's saying. We're at this point in full-on hostility mode. And the interesting thing is that we still have 6 chapters, 7 chapters, 8 chapters, 9 chapters until Jesus dies. So there's going to be a whole lot of mess happening in these last 6 months of Jesus' life. All kicks off here in John chapter 7. And what we have is the Jews at this point in Jesus' ministry, the Jews want to kill Jesus. We're going to see that here at the beginning of John chapter 7. And Jesus has just kind of exposed himself to the crowds in Galilee. He's just really started to tell everybody who he is. We saw the first I am statement here in John's gospel where Jesus said, I am the bread of life. I came down from heaven. I'm the only one who has seen God. And he starts using these very exclusive phrases, terms, and people, they don't want anything to do with that. We saw at the end of John chapter 6 just last week that when people start to find out who Jesus is, the reality is most people walk away. The crowds disband. They don't want to follow Jesus. They don't want to do what he's doing. That's the sad reality of the world that Jesus lived in. I don't think it's much different than the world that we live in today. I think it's about the same. Jesus, as he's continued to say more about who he really is, we're just going to see the hostility increase. People don't want to submit to God. They don't want to serve other people. They don't want to be the least among men. They don't want to sacrifice for other people. What we're going to see here at the beginning of John chapter 7 is family drama. Some of you have family drama. Some of you have a lot of family drama. I'm not sure of any family that I know that doesn't have family drama. But picture this for a minute. Jesus is the oldest of his brothers, and we'll talk about which brothers he has. But he's the oldest of his brothers, the firstborn, and he grew up with them, and he was a baby, and he grew up, and then other brothers came, and they saw him as just the older brother. And then he gets to approximately 30 years of age, and he starts walking around telling people, I came down from heaven. So you might be able to imagine what that would do to a family dynamic. When someone goes off and starts claiming, I came from God, and I'm the only one who came from God, and you have to eat in my flesh and drink in my blood, or you don't have life in you. What that might mean to physical brothers that Jesus has, when he starts teaching these things and doing these things, signs. They're seeing the signs, but they're also hearing what he's saying, and they're not quite on board at this point. This is not the family that we see writing letters like James later on, like Judas later on, writing letters saying Jesus is who he says he was. This is skeptical family. This is drama family. So this is where we're starting. John chapter 7. We'll dive into all that stuff. This is verse 1. after this, after Jesus was in Galilee, after he taught the crowds who he was, after the crowds decided we don't want anything to do with that Jesus, we'll walk away. After this, Jesus went about in Galilee, but he would not go into Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. All right, this is a little bit of an aside because of what we have going on today. Some people walk around in our world today, in our country today, and they don't feel safe. In fact, some people walk around and they're in a lot similar situation as Jesus. He won't even go into that town because if he goes into that town, they're already seeking to kill him. And I wish I could say our world is different today, but it's the same. Now, Jesus wasn't a different skin color than the people around him. Contrary to maybe the pictures that you might see of Jesus being a white Jesus, Jesus was not a white Jesus. Jesus was a darker skin-colored Middle Eastern man. Not a white Jesus. Probably not a black Jesus either. He wasn't a different skin color than all the people around him. But he did know what it felt like to walk around in a place where people were seeking to kill him. So some people have a hard time when they come to Jesus because they say, how could he possibly have all the experiences that I've had? How could he possibly have, maybe he didn't experience racism because he didn't live in a different race than was his own. So maybe he doesn't have a clue what I'm going through when I experience somebody looking down on me because my skin's a little darker or because I have a ponytail. And some people have a hard time believing in Jesus because of things like that. I want you to sit back and realize that although the experiences that Jesus might have had might not have been exactly the same as yours or mine, that doesn't mean he doesn't know what it felt like to be afraid for your life. To walk around in a city and wonder, when are they going to arrest me? Remember that Jesus was innocent. And yet he's still afraid that people are going to try to get rid of him in a permanent sort of way. So if you live in a place or you live in a town where you're afraid that someone might come after you for whatever reason to kill you, even though you've done nothing wrong, that's something Jesus can relate to. Remember that Jesus is here to do the will of his Father. He knows that the Jews are seeking to kill him. He also knows that these festivals, as a part of the Jewish community, men were supposed to get up and go to Judea to be a part of these festivals. And so Jesus here is going to try to balance, in the next few verses, we're going to talk about a little bit this week, a little more next week, and the week after. He's trying to balance being faithful to the Old Testament rules that God's given, while at the same time realizing that people are trying to kill him. And he needs to die at the proper time and the proper way in order for the plan of God to be fulfilled. So he's being careful. When do I go to Judea? When is it safe for me to go there and not be killed now because I need to wait 8 chapters to be killed, 6 months? So I need to find a way to be faithful to what God is commanding me and yet at the same time balance the plan of God and the timing of God. That's what Jesus is doing here. Read verse 2. Now the Jews' feast of the booths was at hand. So you got this feast where Jewish males are supposed to go into Jerusalem. But in Judea, they're trying to kill him. So Jesus is trying to figure out, how do I balance that? And then here's where the family drama comes in. We're going to talk more about the Feast of Booths as we go. It's not going to be the topic of what we talk about today, so I'm going to skip over it. But by the time we get to Jesus and him started talking, the Feast of Booths is going to be really important. So we'll talk about it more later. But here's what his brothers have to say. So in verse 3, so his brothers said to him, "Leave here, go to Judea, that your disciples may see the works that you are doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." You hear the condescending tone? You hear the drama? Oh, Jesus, you're the Messiah. You're the one who came down from heaven. You're in Galilee. All the people that you need to be impressing right now, if you're the Messiah, they're in Jerusalem. Why don't you go there? Why don't you go there to Judea? Oh, wait, they're trying to kill you because they don't believe you. And there's all this condescending tone between them. Mark chapter 6, verse 3 says that Jesus had 4 brothers, James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. So we know that he's at least got a few voices when he's in Galilee, around the surrounding area, and his family is basically just telling him, we don't believe you. We don't believe what you're saying. You're our brother. You have earthly parents. We don't believe you came down from heaven. They understand the humanity of Jesus. He's their brother. But they are not on board with him saying that he's the Messiah. They're definitely not on board with him saying that he is God. I mentioned last week that Scott mentioned on Good Friday this term called dramatic irony. And the reason why he introduced it to you is because it's all over the place in the Gospels. He gave you a couple examples. I gave you one last week. I'm going to give you another one this week. We just read it. Here's what the brothers say to Jesus. No one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. Scott explained how dramatic irony is when a character in a story says something and it has this much meaning, but when the character says it, they only think it has this much meaning. And when you're looking back hindsight, you realize that the truth of what they said is through the roof, but they didn't have a clue what they were saying when they said it. The reality is that someday every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. The reality is the brothers have no idea how openly Jesus will one day be known. And yet they're standing here saying to them, look, if you seek to be known openly, why don't you go do these things in Judea? They have no idea that he absolutely seeks to be known openly. But at the proper time, in the proper way, according to the plan of God, Jesus doesn't just seek to be known openly because that's his plan and he wants it to be that way. He seeks to be known openly because it's the Father's plan. God is in the process of exalting the Son through the death of Jesus Christ. But they don't know that and they don't understand that. They choose to make fun of him. And now Jesus is going to respond to them in their sarcasm and in their condescension. He's going to kind of jab back at them, and that's where we're going to sit today. This is verse 5. John the Apostle says it clearly, for not even his brothers believed in him. What you need to see unfolding in John's gospel is people denying him one after the next. So you've got the crowds in Judea, the crowds in Galilee, sorry. They hear who Jesus is, they walk away. Meanwhile, in Judea, the Jewish rulers want to kill him. Meanwhile, at home, the brothers don't believe who he is. So systematically, when people who find out who Jesus really is, majority of them walk away. We talked about that last week, and we're watching the relationships that Jesus has dwindle one after the next. Here's Jesus' response to the brothers. This we're going to camp out for the rest of today, and then we'll move on next week. Jesus said this to them, my time has not yet come, but your time is always here. My time has not yet come, but your time is always here. This is what he says to his brothers who don't believe him at the beginning. Some people may hear John chapter 2. Jesus said something similar to his mother at the wedding when he performed the first miracle. His mother comes to him and says, there's no wine left. And he says, what does that have to do with me? My time has not yet come. And so again, he's saying to his family, this time not his mother, but his brothers, my time has not yet come. But then he says this, your time is always here. And that's a jab at who his brothers follow. That's a jab at what's really going on inside their life that they don't quite understand, that they're now criticizing Jesus for. Essentially, Jesus is saying, brothers, you are like the world. You have no anchor. Jesus is waiting for the Father to tell him when to go to the festival. But the brothers, they're not submissive to God. They don't care. They go up to the festival when they choose. They not go up to the festival when they choose because they're their own God. So your time to go up to the festival, your time's always, because you don't answer to anyone. You are essentially your own God. And some people listening to that in our world today, they would say, exactly. That's exactly what I want to be. I don't want to be tied down to anyone. I don't want to be submissive to anyone. I don't want somebody to tell me when I have to go up to Jerusalem and when I can't go up to Jerusalem. I don't want anyone to tell me what I can and can't do or hold me to any sort of standard. I want to make my own rules. I want to be my own God. I want to say what's right and wrong, and I want to live my life happy without anybody telling me what I should do or shouldn't do. And on top of that, I want you to be happy about it for me. Never mind when my decisions might affect you. Jesus says to his brothers, your time to make your own decisions is always, because you don't follow God. You're not accountable to anyone, essentially. There are some people that strive for this kind of life. In fact, they would say, yes, Jesus is the crazy one. The brothers are the awesome one. They're living their best life now, maybe. But this is a fantasy world. We weren't created to create our own morality. We weren't created to be our own gods. We were created to be kings and queens, yes, but under the rulership of God. We were created to live in submission to God, and as a part of that relationship that we submit to God, God loves us. He protects us. He doesn't deceive us. He doesn't neglect us. Doesn't hold us back. Forgives us. And he's willing to discipline us. The reason why I talk about submission to God is because, number one, the brothers here were struggling with it. They didn't know it. They thought they were just teasing their brother. But people today, Christians and non-Christians, we struggle with submission to God. I'll give you one reason why, which is one reason that's probably a million reasons. I think this may be the main reason. We struggle to submit to God because we have a million pictures of unhealthy leadership in our life. We live life, and the longer we go, it's almost inevitable that we come across a selfish boss or a parent that's neglectful or a law enforcement agent that can't tell that we're all the same, or government officials that seem like they're corrupt. We have teachers or coaches, and we experience just some garbage pictures of leadership. And so we respond accordingly. If that's what leadership looks like, if that's what control over me looks like, I don't want anything to do with that. It's safer for me to be in control of my own life, to be God of my own life, to decide what morality is for me, and let everybody else just fend for themselves, because it feels safer. Jesus says to his brothers, your time is always here because you don't submit to anyone. Here's the problem. The problem is that God is not our earthly parents. He's not corrupt government officials. He's not bad law enforcement agents. He's not poor teachers that we've had or poor coaches that we've had. He's not your abusive brother or sister. He's not any of those things, although he will act as a parent at times. He is absolutely in control of all things the government does. He will teach you and coach you. Praise God, he will enforce his morality no matter what you choose. He'll be the best boss you've ever had. He's not flawed. He's not selfish. He's not traumatized and re-traumatizing you. He's not deceptive. He's not neglectful. And yet we take the experiences that we have with leadership in our lives and we project them onto God. And a lot of people then turn away and say, if that's submission, if that's what it means to be underneath someone, I don't want that. But it's not, because Jesus is none of those things. Don't live in the fantasy world of thinking that you can be God. Don't live in the fantasy world of believing that if you just could create your own morality or rules that you would end up where you want to be. You won't. One last thing I want to tweak how you understand what Jesus might be saying to his brothers. It's absolutely a jab when he says, my time has not yet come. I submit to God. I'm waiting for God for an answer to when I should go up to Judea, but your time is always, because you don't submit to God. One last way I want you to kind of understand when Jesus says that from another angle or another aspect. If it's true that the time for the brothers is always because they don't submit to God, to do whatever they want, make their own choices, choose between right and wrong, the other choice that they have constantly is the choice to change what they think about Jesus, to submit to him. If it's true that your time is always to make your own decisions while you're not following God, it's also true that your time is always to start submitting to God. It doesn't matter what you've done. Doesn't matter where you've been. Your time is always now to go from, I wasn't following God, I don't believe who Jesus is, to, I'm the created human being, Jesus is God, I can never be God, and I don't want to be God. I want God to be in control, and I just want to do what he says. Your time, the brothers' time, is not only always to go up to Jerusalem whenever they want, or not go to Jerusalem whenever they want, it's also to submit to what Jesus is saying, to become believers, to change your mind. Your time is always now. So is mine. If you're not like the brothers, and you are believing, and you're thinking, I'm not the hostile family, I am believing in who Jesus is, and I am submitting to the plan of God. Can I encourage you to wait on whatever God is telling you to do? And if you don't have an answer yet, wait. Jesus is on the cusp of the festival going, God, they're trying to kill me, but I know I need to go up and celebrate. And then later on in the chapter, we're going to find out that he not only has to celebrate the festival, but he needs to say a few words too. And so Jesus is praying to God, God, how do I make these two things happen? If I go to Jerusalem, they might kill me, but I need to go to Jerusalem, and I need to speak a few words. So God, how do I make these two things happen? And now he's waiting. If you're not like the brothers, if you are believing, can I encourage you to wait for instructions from God? If you're seeing two things in your life that don't make sense, they don't seem to work out, wait. Ask God, how do these two things go together? I know I'm supposed to be doing this, and I know I'm supposed to be doing that, but I need guidance. Wait. There is a plan of God for your life. Don't wait with impatience. Don't wait with anxiety. Don't wait with impatience or hopelessness or fear. Wait with confidence. Wait with confidence. We're going to take communion today as a group, and if you come tomorrow, when you come in to service, there'll be these little self-communion cups that you can pick up on your way in, because we're going to do communion tomorrow at the in-person services as well. And so these little individual cups have a little bread on the top, and they have some wine in the bottom, so you can just take an individual cup and then out of the bucket when you come in tomorrow. But we're going to do communion today. If you're not believing in Jesus Christ, the time is now to believe. The time is now, and the time is until you don't have any breath in your lungs. The time is now. To believe, to not look back, to remember the death of Jesus Christ, the broken body, the poured out blood. For those of you who are believing, I hope you have communion in your hands by this point. If not, I'm going to stall a minute or two longer so you can go get it. For those of you who are believing, and you're thinking, I just want to remember the broken body, and I just want to remember the shed blood of Christ. I need to encourage you that to just remember mentally the broken body and the shed blood of Christ is not enough. If all you do when you come to communion is you say, I remember that it happened, that's great. That's a great start. Listen to Matthew chapter 16. This is what Jesus said to his disciples. Then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come to me, let him first deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. Whoever would save his life will lose it. That's the person who doesn't submit to anyone. That's the person who doesn't care when they go up to Jerusalem, when they don't, when they buy a house, when they don't, when they get married, when they don't, when they discipline their kids, when they don't. They have no standard. They have no anchor to God. Whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, Jesus says, will find it. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world, forfeits his soul? What shall a man give in return for his soul? I don't know what God would be asking you to do more than just remember the broken body and the shed blood of Christ. But communing with God is about picking up your cross and following him. Pick up your cross, die to yourself, apologize to your wife, apologize to your husband, go back and rebuild that relationship with your kids. Get married if you're living together and you're not married. Definitely get married if you're sleeping together and you're not married. I mentioned earlier that some people in this time are, maybe God is trying to teach you to hold your tongue. I've been studying a little bit in the book of Proverbs. I'll read these things. Maybe this is what God is trying to say to you today. 4 verses, and there's a bunch more, I promise you. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. If that's not Facebook in a nutshell, I don't know what is. A fool's lips walk into a fight, and his mouth invites a beating. A fool's mouth is his ruin, and his lips are a snare to his soul. A fool gives vent to his spirit, but a wise man holds back quietly. Be careful, be careful, be careful. What you say, what you post. It is about more than just remembering the body and blood of Christ. It's about your life being transformed into his image. Pick up your cross, follow me. Pray with me, and then we'll take communion, and then Scott and Macy will sing one more song. Father, we come to you with humility. That sometimes we live, and we are just like your brothers who at first didn't believe, or they definitely weren't submitting to God. God, we want to wait on you. Teach us to hear your voice. Teach us to listen to your words. God, keep us steadfast, planted in our feet, planted where they are until we hear you say, go here and do this. And then God, give us the boldness to go there and do that. And then wait for your next word. God, help us to live our lives, not just by our own decisions or our own wills, but to submit to who you are in every area of our life. What we say, what we do, how we treat our kids, how we treat our spouse. God, we don't want to be like the brothers whose time is now because they have nothing time in them. Jesus, we want to be like you. Listening for the voice of the Father, saying, when you say go, I'll go. But until then, I'll stay. And I'll wait for an answer from you, God. God, change us, transform us in this way. We pray. In Jesus' name.